You may believe that you chose to be here, that among thousands of possibilities, your consciousness decided to listen to this right now. But what if it's the opposite? What if it wasn't you who chose to observe, but rather the observation that chose you? There are moments when life comes to a halt, not because something outside has changed, but because inside, everything has gone silent, as if an ancient presence, one that's always been there, suddenly decided to be heard. It doesn't speak with words. It speaks through absence, through pauses, through mirrors. You try to move forward but stumble over the same old pattern. Faces change, landscapes shift, but the storyline remains the same, as if a secret cycle is repeating behind the scenes of the visible world. A cycle you don't understand, but feel, and it presses, suffocates, stagnates. At this point, many give up. Others blame life, time, or luck. But there are those among the few who stop and ask, what if it's not the world out there? What if it's the way I observe? It is in that exact instant that something invisible moves, not in time, but in frequency, as if the field had been waiting for your pause to reveal what has always existed beyond form. This field needs no answers. It vibrates with your presence. Maybe life isn't asking for more effort, nor for more knowledge. Maybe it's just asking you to remember, to observe what has always been observing you in return. And when that memory lights up, there's no turning back, because reality, once solid, becomes a mirror, and you understand the observation was never your choice. It was a silent calling, an inner summons, and it has arrived. For a long time, we believed that thinking was observing, that it was enough to look closely, reflect, analyze, and there you go, awareness. But there is something more subtle, almost imperceptible, behind thought. Something that doesn't move with words nor with mental images. Something that simply is. That something is the true observer. It doesn't comment, judge, or compare. It simply perceives, silently, like the sky that remains untouched, even when heavy clouds cover it. The mind, on the other hand, is like the wind, unstable, noisy, always searching for somewhere to rest. But the observer does not seek. It is the point where all seeking ends. That's why so many feel tired, because they've spent their lives trying to transform reality through the force of thought, without realizing they were using the wrong tool. The mind does not observe, it interprets, and by interpreting, it distorts. It makes things personal, it makes them limited. You know when you mentally relive a past moment, and your body reacts as if it's happening now. That's not memory, that's identification. It's the filter of the mind, taking the place of the observer. When that happens, you are not in the present. You are repeating the same old vibration, hoping for a new result, and that repetition comes with a cost. The body starts to break down, relationships lose their shine. Life, once full of possibilities, shrinks into a familiar narrative. Everything seems to revolve around the same pain, the same fear, the same absence. And the mind, no matter how hard it tries to fix things, only creates more noise, more paths within the same maze. Krishnamurti wrote, "To see without thought is the highest form of intelligence." This sentence is not an invitation to ignorance but to presence, because thought always comes from the past. It is built from old fragments, inherited judgments, distorted memories. But the observer, it doesn't belong to time. It is pure, formless perception. And here lies the key most people ignore. You don't need to silence the mind by force. You just need to recognize that it is not you. It is a conditioned reflection, a repetitive program. But the one observing it is free. At that moment, you might feel something move within, a small pause between two thoughts, a presence that doesn't judge what you're feeling right now. That presence is you. Not the character, not the story, not the name, but the consciousness that has always been there, even when everything seemed to fall apart. That recognition doesn't come through effort. It comes through surrender. When you stop trying to understand everything and start simply observing, not with the mind, but with the field of presence. The mind seeks answers. The observer does not. It simply sees. And in that pure seeing, the silent transmutation begins. Because what is truly seen dissolves. What once resisted lets go. The old pattern exposed to the light of consciousness loses its grip. like a shadow vanishing when a candle is lit. This is the nature of true awakening, not a mental achievement, but a collapse of the illusion of control. You don't need to think differently, you just need to stop believing that thought is what sees, because the one who sees is beyond, and it is in that beyond that life changes. Not because everything magically resolves, but because you stop fighting the reflection and begin to touch the mirror. And then something extraordinary happens. The external reality begins to respond to your vibration, not your effort. Because the universe doesn't react to what you think, it listens to what you vibrate, and what you vibrate is born from your state of observation. There is a moment when everything seems to collapse, but nothing actually falls apart. It's as if life held its breath, and in the middle of the silence, something is watching you from within. You can't explain it, but you feel it. A presence without a face, an invitation without words, a calling that doesn't come from the outside, but vibrates from within. And it's not a call to do, it's a call to remember. You could be washing dishes, driving, walking down an ordinary street, and suddenly, for no apparent reason, you feel that something has crossed your field. A thought slows down, a breath deepens, and time, which until then had been chasing you, seems to dissolve within seconds that no longer pass. In that moment, consciousness touches your skin from the inside, and everything changes. But this change is not visible, nor measurable. It's like the beginning of an echo in a silent valley. You don't know where it came from, nor where it's going. You only know that something responded, and that response was yours without realizing it. Because only those who have been deeply absent can feel so strongly when they return. The call of consciousness doesn't shout, it waits. It lingers in the details of your reality, in subtle sensations, in patterns that bother you, not to punish, but to remind. Because while you believe you're lost, something greater within you knows exactly what it's doing. The recurring pain, the persistent cycle, the face that reappears in new relationships, all of these are vibrational activation points. Parts of your story that refuse to stay hidden. Because consciousness wants to be seen, it wants to be born within you, but not as an idea, as presence. Have you noticed how the body reacts before the mind? How the heart races before an important decision, even when reason says everything's fine? That's not anxiety, it's vibrational memory. It's the field of consciousness trying to break through the wall of logic. The calling begins here, when something in you feels that you can no longer continue being who you've always been, when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change, when the void stops being uncomfortable and becomes a portal. Thoth, in his ancient writings, said that what is asleep in the flesh awakens by the light of the inner gaze. This light is not a pretty idea. It's a state, a silence that settles in when you stop resisting. When you accept that maybe you were never in control, and yet you were always being guided. This is the point where many give up, because the mind demands maps, but consciousness only offers the next step. Never more than that, and that is unsettling. Most people want linear, chronological, tangible answers, but consciousness works in spirals, in symbols, in resonance. That's why many times you feel pulled inward. You feel the urge to step back, to be silent, to be alone. It's not withdrawal, it's energetic gathering. It's the soul preparing to pierce through the next veil. You are being called to observe with eyes you don't yet know how to use. And because of that, everything around you seems blurry. But this fog is necessary, because it dissolves the old vision. It makes you question the certainties that have always held you back. And in that space of sacred doubt, a new clarity is born. Not the clarity of the mind, but of presence. And presence does not explain, it reveals. That's why when you begin to answer this call, reality responds in strange ways. People drift away, situations fall apart, plans change, and at first, everything seems wrong. But then, you realize, it wasn't the world that was falling apart. It was your old identity. This is the pain and the gift of the calling. It doesn't come to improve your life. It comes to transform it. It comes to remind you that you are not here to repeat stories, but to dissolve them. You're not here to understand the world. You're here to remember the one who observes it. And when this call is answered, even without words, even without knowing how, everything realigns. Because consciousness doesn't demand perfection. It only needs you to stop pretending you didn't hear it. There is a subtle, almost imperceptible moment when the mirror of reality changes texture. It still reflects what's within you, but something in the reflection begins to transform, not because the world out there has changed, but because your presence has changed within. You can't explain it, but you begin to notice small breaks in the storyline. Situations that used to throw you off balance now simply pass. Words that once triggered deep emotional responses now sound distant, almost irrelevant. As if reality were subtly leaning, no longer toward what you fear, but toward what you vibrate. The mirror does not lie. It faithfully reflects your vibrational field, even when you don't know what you're emitting. That's why observing without judgment is an act of courage. Because what you begin to see outside and once blamed as the cause of your suffering, now comes to be recognized as part of an internal reflection. It's unsettling, but also liberating. There is a living, neutral intelligence sustaining this field. It does not punish or reward. It simply responds. And the response doesn't come from the words you say, nor from the promises you make to the universe. It comes from the real frequency that emanates from your state of being. That's why many people get frustrated. They make affirmations, do techniques, rituals, but remain stuck in the same patterns, because nothing done at the surface reaches the field of creation. Only what comes from conscious observation passes through the mirror. You can say, "I trust," but if your body vibrates with tension, if your mind is trying to control the details, the mirror will reflect scarcity, not out of punishment, but out of coherence. Reality is deeply coherent with your field, and this field is not moved by words, it is moved by presence. Lao Tzu said, "He who knows does not speak, he who speaks does not know." It's not about silencing external communication, but remembering that true alignment doesn't need to be announced. It is felt, and when it's real, the mirror responds. At this point, you no longer need proof, because your very vibration begins to attract different realities, not like magic, but like resonance. Situations that once required effort begin to flow. People who carried the same pain start to drift away, and those who vibrate on the same silent frequency draw near. But this process doesn't happen without noise. Before the new reflection settles, the old one still insists. It tests, provokes, tries to pull you back. These are the last echoes of the old vibration trying to survive. And it is exactly at this point that many give up, because they mistake this return of the old as a sign of failure. But it is not failure, it is transition. Reality needs time to reorganize the mirror. Because while you still observe with doubt, it hesitates to collapse the new image. The universe doesn't want speed, it wants coherence, and coherence is born when you remain in presence, even when nothing seems to be changing. This is the true vibrational test. Not to act out of the urge to escape pain, but to remain in silence even within chaos. Because when you hold your gaze, when you refuse to return to the character, something begins to dissolve. The old image loses strength. The repetitive cycle weakens, and suddenly, without fanfare, a new reality begins to manifest, not as a reward, but as a natural reflection of your new vibration. You don't need to control this process. You only need to sustain the state of observation, and that requires surrender. Because the mind will want to act, resolve, anticipate, but the field of creation doesn't respond to control. It responds to vibration. And vibration is born from the internal place where you already believe, even without evidence. That is the difference between imagining and being. When you only imagine, there is still separation. When you become, the mirror has already reflected. And at that point, everything bends, not to your desire, but to your frequency. Because reality doesn't change through effort, it bends to your silent state of presence. There is a stage on the path where effort becomes too heavy, not from weakness but from clarity. It's when you realize that there's nothing left to force, control, or understand. Everything that could be done has already been tried. Everything that could be said has already been said. And still, something remains stuck. It's at this point that surrender is born. But pay attention, it's not giving up, it's surrender. An internal movement that releases resistance and recognizes what has always been right before your eyes, but never truly touched. Life was never about controlling the river. It was about learning how to float. You begin to see that what holds you back isn't the pain itself, but the unconscious attachment to how you observe the pain. the silent resistance, the attempt to control what is already in flow. The mind wants to fight, interpret, justify, but the flow doesn't need that. The flow only needs space, and space is not created by more action, it's created by less noise. It's in this deep listening to internal silence that the real is revealed, because what seemed like blockage was protection. What seemed like absence was a pause so you could realign. What seemed like loneliness was a calling. The universe did not punish you. It simply waited until you were ready to see with new eyes. This surrender doesn't happen all at once. It insinuates itself. It arrives like a good kind of tiredness, like an exhaustion that doesn't ask for sleep, but for presence. A tiredness from the attempt to be something, to achieve something, to prove something, to uphold an identity that no longer vibrates within you. When that tiredness matures, true surrender is born, and with it, the flow begins to move, but not like a wild river. It moves with the precision of an invisible dance. It brings what is necessary. It takes away what no longer serves. It opens paths that weren't on the map of the mind, because the mind seeks shortcuts, but consciousness chooses initiations, and every beginning requires an end. It's at this point that you look back and no longer recognize yourself, and that's okay. You haven't failed. You've simply shed old versions that upheld the illusion of control. Now what remains is lighter, more truthful, closer to the creative silence. Bruce Lipton states that the environment shapes biology, but what he calls environment here can be understood as a vibrational field. When you surrender control, your field changes, and as it changes, everything around you begins to respond differently, even your body, even your thoughts. You realize that what once felt like effort was simply misalignment, because when there is internal alignment, doing is no longer an obligation. It flows as a natural extension of being. There is no more struggle. There is dance. There is no more urgency. There is perfect timing. But for this to happen, you must go through the emptiness of surrender, the point where nothing seems to be happening, where no answer comes, where the silence is almost deafening. This is the womb of the new, and for the new to be born, the old must dissolve. In that space, many things will leave: people, plans, beliefs. There will be pain, yes, but a different kind of pain, a pain that no longer imprisons, it frees. Because for the first time, you're not trying to change the pain. You're allowing it to be what it is, until it dissolves on its own. And it is in that allowing that the flow is restored. You begin to live in harmony with life, not in conflict against it. You begin to notice the subtle signs along the way, the encounters that weren't by chance, the pauses that in truth saved you, and the losses that were in silence doors of liberation. Surrender is not the end. It is the beginning of true alignment. It's when you stop pushing reality with force and start being guided by a greater intelligence, not some external entity, but life itself within you. That observer who chose you back in the beginning now begins to breathe more freely, and your reality begins to bend before it, not because you learned more, but because, finally, you stopped resisting. When the mind falls silent and resistance dissolves, something begins to be perceived in an almost unsettling way. Reality is not happening outside of you. It is echoing your presence. The world you see, the encounters you have, the recurring patterns that arise. All of it responds on some level to the vibrational field in which you reside. This is not a spiritual theory. It is a direct experience revealed gradually when you begin to observe with neutrality what you once judged as destiny, karma, or chance. You see the subtleties. You realize that what you most reject in others is often what still resists within yourself. That the challenges that arise are not obstacles, but mirrors vibrating in tune with your frequency. Consciousness does not deliver what you want. It delivers what you vibrate. That's why wanting is not enough. Asking is not enough. Only when the being vibrates in coherence with what it desires does the universe respond. But not like magic, like a mirror. You then see that the world is neither against you nor in your favor. It's simply resonating with what you sustain in presence. And presence is not a posture, it's a state. It's the internal place from which you live, what you feel when no one is watching, what manifests when silence fills the space that was once occupied by control, expectation, effort. When that space is genuine, it collapses the old reflection, because the mirror can no longer sustain the image of a character that no longer vibrates in you. This is the moment when everything begins to change without you needing to change everything. Choices flow with ease, answers come without being sought. The cycles that once seemed endless, close in peace, without pain. Not because you defeated them, but because you no longer identify with what used to sustain them. And here lies a subtle secret. The field of reality does not need you to be perfect. It only needs you to be honest. Honest with what you feel, with what you think, with what you vibrate. Because reality does not respond to the character you pretend to be. It responds to the field you truly are, even if you don't want to admit it. When that honesty settles in, something gets purified. Not dramatically, but naturally. You begin to speak less and feel more. You begin to plan less and trust more. You begin to stop reacting and start observing. And in this space of pure observation, the echo of reality changes tone. It stops repeating old patterns and begins to create new possibilities. But be aware, this does not mean everything will become easy. It means you will begin to live at another level of consciousness, a level where even the challenges come with embedded wisdom, where even the pains carry codes of liberation, because now you're no longer in survival mode. You are in a state of creation. Creation not as fabrication, but as an extension of being. What vibrates in you begins to take form in external reality, not to prove something to the world, but simply because it is inevitable. The quantum field responds to vibrational coherence with surgical precision. Tom Campbell, in studying consciousness as an evolving information system, said that the universe is self-adjusting, that it responds with new data whenever there is a true internal shift. And that's what happens here. When you change the way you inhabit your presence, the universe rewrites the data of your path, and that cannot be faked, because the field feels. It doesn't hear what you say, it hears what you sustain. That's why real change is silent. It doesn't shout, it doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself slowly, in the in-between lines of the days, in the detail of coincidences, in the embrace that comes at the right time, in the silence that no longer disturbs. And you understand it was never about fighting, it was about vibrating differently. Reality is now an echo, a faithful reflection of your presence, and if the reflection still bothers you, there is no guilt, there is an invitation, a subtle calling for you to look more truthfully, with more compassion, and with more surrender. Because when presence becomes pure, the entire world changes tone. You did not choose to observe. It was consciousness itself that summoned you. And when it calls, it is not so that you may understand more, but so that you may undo what was never truly you. The veil lifted a little today, and maybe for the first time, you felt that you are not fighting life. You are simply relearning how to see it, without the lenses of the past. Now something in you has already changed, not because you heard new truths, but because you recognized one that has always been there. Reality doesn't begin outside. It begins in the invisible field of your presence, and that field is listening to your silence. If this crossed your field, write in the comments, "I was chosen by consciousness." That way I'll know you stayed until the end, in the only place where change begins, in your gaze.